Welcome to NFL Fantasy Game Day presented by Geico. I am Adam Rank, joined by Kimmy Checks, Marcus Grant, and Kimmy, how you living?
I'm living good. First of all, I like this new music. I feel like this is like we're preparing for Club Dub. I'm good. I got puppies over the weekend. This will be my very first Sunday of having them sitting and watching football with me, so I'm ready to go.
Yeah, you're going to need that Game Pass because those puppies are going to have you outside every couple of minutes because they're going to need to go out and that sort of thing. But enjoy the football. Use your Game Pass, and you can check out those games on replay whenever you want.
Oh, my gosh, that is what I do. I chase around the kids, and I just walk around holding the phone. Welcome to that life, Kimmy. And also welcome to anybody who is following along on Twitter or on YouTube. Please send us any fantasy questions at NFL Fantasy. And, of course, if you're watching and enjoying the show on YouTube at youtube.com/NFL, our Michael F. Florio is answering every single question. I know you can't see him yet, but he's got an awesome floral shirt on. So just know that if you ask a question and he comes through for you, you have to send him a floral shirt. It's just part of the thing. It's part of the thing. In any event, it's week 3. We've got some hot takes. Marcus, why don't you lead us off?
All right, let's get fiery right now, right? I'm saying that Mitchell Trubisky, the Mitchell Trubisky, starting quarterback for your Chicago Bears, is going to be a top 5 fantasy quarterback this week. You look at what the Falcons defense has allowed through their first 2 games. In each of the first 2 weeks, they have allowed the QB1. Week 1, week 2, it happened. Now, I'm not going to go out and say that Mitch is going to be the QB1 this week, but I do think with his weapons between Allen Robinson, Anthony Miller, Jimmy Graham, who has been resurrected from the fantasy grave, I see big things coming for Mitch. Get Mitch or die trying this week.
Oh, but life's a Mitch, and then you lose your fantasy week. Kimmy, what do you got going?
I like that. Life's a Mitch. That's really good. That's one of your funniest ones, right?
Oh, thanks.
All right, I'm also going to be talking about a quarterback, but mine is a rookie. I think that Joe Burrow is going to double the points of Carson Wentz, and the Cincinnati Bengals are going to get their very first win on this season in week 3. Now, the reason I think this is because they're up against the Eagles, who have lost by a combined 28 points. They're tied for the second worst point differential in the NFL. Joe Burrow, he's killing it this season, averaging a little over 20 fantasy points per game, 12th amongst QBs. Carson Wentz on the other side, he's 27th amongst quarterbacks, only averaging 12 fantasy points. So Joe Burrow, this shouldn't even really be a spicy take. Just go out there and ball. And sorry for those who have Wentz in their starting lineup. You should rethink that.
You know, it's funny, too. I think Louisiana State wouldn't mind having Joey Burrow back after what happened yesterday with Mississippi State, Mike Leach, and all that stuff. But I see what Marcus is doing with his Mitch Trubisky take, but unfortunately, fantasy is never quite that easy. It's always somebody that you don't expect. That's why I'm gonna take a little page from his notebook and say a quarterback from his team, little Nicky Mullins, is going to end up being a top 5 fantasy quarterback this week. We've actually seen him in a spotlight role, in a backup and an understudy type of role, come in and actually kill it and look pretty good, and at times made you wonder if the 49ers did have their quarterback of the future. Of course, he did that with George Kittle and everything like that. It might be a little bit more difficult, but Jordan Reed played really well last week. And you know what? This is the thing about 49er fans. We've made our peace. We're cool and everything is great, but you guys really need to stop disrespecting Jimmy Garoppolo. So when Mullins goes out there and kills it this week, just let it be a good week. You got the win, and you're back home, and you should be ready to go. I think you have the Eagles next week, so you're going to be fine. Now, let's look at the injury board because there are some big injuries that have happened so far. Now, the good news is Josh Jacobs and Darren the Baller Waller are active for the Las Vegas Raiders. They should be in your lineup. Kenny Golladay is active this week. We'll talk about him a little bit more in just a moment. I mentioned George Kittle being out, as is Raheem Mostert. A.J. Brown still battling through that knee injury, but the big one, Julio Jones is not going to play this week against the Chicago Bears. We will have some replacements for him in a couple of weeks. But I did want to start with a couple of the other big injury news. Devontae Adams has been battling a minor, as they're describing it, a minor hamstring injury. He thinks he's going to go. He's described, Ian Rappaport said he's kind of a long shot to play, but really wants to. So, Marcus, what do we do with this information?
Well, I am just too scared to sit Devontae Adams if he's going to be on the field. We have seen through the first couple of weeks how heavily Aaron Rodgers relies on him in that passing game. And so just if he's out there, it's tough for me to put him on the bench. So we'll see. I know that earlier in the week they suggested that it was minor and that there really wasn't much to worry about. So all of a sudden, I'm not sure if something's happened in the days since, but now it is sort of in doubt. If he does not go, I would say go get Marquez Valdez-Scantling off the waiver wire. I think he's sort of the next man up. But if Devontae plays, I'm playing him.
Well, you got to have somebody who's playing in that game or a later game, which includes MVS, obviously. The Lazard King is another player, or Mecole Hardman, who is playing on Monday night against the Baltimore Ravens. Another one, Kenny Golladay. First time we're going to see him this season. Kimmy, are you feeling confident getting him into your lineup this week against the Arizona Cardinals?
You know, this is kind of a 50-50 because the Cardinals defense is actually sneakily pretty good, right? Budda Baker, he was dealing with some injury, but he's going to be ready to go today. And so is Kenny Golladay. We finally get to see him, though he is saying that though he's playing, he's not 100% yet with that hamstring injury. However, this is good news for the Lions because they could use some additional deep ball threat throwing downfield help, and that is what Golladay could add. Now, Marvin Jones Jr., he is the second best receiver. We've been seeing him get a lot of shine. I do think Golladay has some flashes of opportunity. I think he could be a go today and be good to get in your lineup. But I think the fact that he's not fully 100% and Marvin Jones Jr. has been playing so well, I kind of have some apprehension there.
And if you have to hit the free agent market, Kimmy, why don't we go back to you? Who are some of the players you are looking at if you need to go scramble and find a player right now?
So earlier you mentioned that Julio Jones, he is out. That is devastating for fantasy managers. Right before the show started, I had to make sure to get him out of my lineup because it was kind of questionable ahead of this week. But with him out, you know who is a go? Russell Gage. Everyone should go and try to pick him up if he is still available. 16 plus fantasy points in both games this season, right? He's incredible. 53 routes out of the slot this season, which is tied for the 5th most amongst wide receivers. Now the Chicago Bears, ranked, they're allowing over 30 fantasy points per game to wide receivers this season. So I think Russell Gage, he's going to ball out. He's going to have a day. So go run if you need to have a replacement for Julio Jones.
One of the names we saw on that injury board who is inactive today is A.J. Brown. He continues to battle an injury. So the guy to go get for me is Corey Davis, the guy on the other side who, through the first couple weeks of the season, it looks like the long-awaited Corey Davis breakout season is in progress. I mean, after Devontae Parker had his last year, now it's time for Corey Davis to have his. And he's going against a Viking secondary that is not what it once was. And, kudos to Adam Rank for sort of pointing this out a couple weeks ago. This Vikings defense is not the fearsome group we have become to know over the last few seasons. That secondary looks very vulnerable. Ryan Tannehill is playing well. So Corey Davis looks like he has a shot to be a really productive player, especially if you're needing a flex option.
And if either one of those players are already off the waiver wire and you want to hit us with, oh, thanks, I drafted him or whatever, fine. I'm sure that Chase Claypool is likely available in your waiver wire right now. And we saw last week with that big hookup right there with Ben Roethlisberger, kind of what we expected coming into the season and what we really liked from him coming out of college. And the one thing about the Steelers, when you go back to the last time Ben Roethlisberger played a full year for that club, they are one of the most prolific at throwing the football. So I want to get as many parts of that offense as possible. I know Deontay Johnson's out there killing it. Juju working himself through an injury, but I think Chase Claypool, somebody can pick up and probably rely on this week. Another big one too, with George Kittle out. I mentioned Jordan Reed earlier in the show. Marcus, do you think that we can trust Jordan Reed for a second consecutive week?
I think we can. I was very surprised to see how well he fit in last week in that game against the Jets. And look, the issue with Jordan Reed has never been one of talent. It's just been a question of him staying healthy and staying on the field. And right now, he's healthy and on the field. And in an offense that needs somebody to catch the football, right? I mean, the wide receivers have been hurt pretty much all year long. Now George Kittle is out. They've got to go somewhere with it. I also like to think that maybe Nick Mullins will have some sort of rapport. We've seen before when you get backup quarterbacks playing with sort of second teamers, if you will, they tend to work well together because they see each other in practice. So I would trust Jordan Reed this week.
Yeah, I'm here for Mullins and Jordan Reed as a kind of a fun ticket here in week 3. But time now for 15 for 15 presented by Geico, and we're going to be dishing out our top 15 starts of the week and then some more, and we will start here at the quarterback position These are my top 5 stardom quarterbacks for the week. And Hytham, can we run that board? Thank you, sir. Ryan Tannehill, Josh Allen. I know a lot of people are apprehensive about Josh Allen this week. I certainly am not. Dak Prescott, Ben Roethlisberger. Kimmy's favorite play this week, Joe Burrow. Marcus, why don't we start with you? You can pick one of these 5, or if you want to be a hipster who's at In-N-Out and has to order off the menu, I invite you to do that as well.
Yeah, I'm going to go with the 4x4, and I'm going to go with Kyler Murray as my quarterback this week. I mean, Kyler's been fantastic so far this season. I mean, as we sit here right now and talk, he's actually on pace to break Lamar Jackson's single-season quarterback rushing record. Now, I don't know if that's actually going to happen, but it does speak to how well he's playing, and he's got a fantastic matchup against a Lions defense that is really struggling to cover wide receivers, is not getting much pressure on the quarterback. So I think the season of Kyler continues today.
I love it, Marcus. You know I've been hyping Kyler all season, so 100% in agreement there. But I gotta take a homer pick in Patrick Mahomes. I understand that he is going up against the Baltimore Ravens, and a lot of people may say, hey, this is a tough matchup. But fear not, because in both career starts against the Ravens, he has gotten 20-plus fantasy points and continue to ball out. He's averaging almost 25 fantasy points against Baltimore, 54 rushing yards versus the Chargers in week 2. That's tied for the second most in his career. He's also had 2+ touchdown passes in both games this season. It's Patrick Mahomes. This is kind of a dumb moment because you would never sit Patrick Mahomes, but also expect big things ahead of this Ravens-Chiefs game.
Thank you so much for pointing that out, Kimmy. I got way too many questions about Patrick Mahomes. So I'm glad that you set the record straight. And here are my running backs for week 3. Austin Eckler, Miles Sanders. There's a number of injuries to the front of the Cincinnati Bengals. That could be a smash spot for him. Kenyan Drake, David Montgomery, Melvin Gordon the third. Kimmy, why don't we go back? I was so impressed with your Patrick Mahomes answer. I want to go back to you. Who's a running back that you really like in week 3?
I love that. Thank you for giving me a little pat on the back there. I really like Jerick McKinnon. Now, I'm sure all fantasy enthusiasts, this is a name that you have heard buzzing all week, and that is because Raheem Mostert and Tevin Coleman will not be playing today. So that means all the opportunity is coming for McKinnon. He had 3 rushes for 77 yards and a touchdown against the Jets in week 2. He converted a 2nd and 31 with a 55-yard rushing versus the Jets. He's had 6 red zone opportunities, which is the most on the team. You know, we talked about the switch at quarterback earlier today and Nick Mullins. If they do not feel comfortable with him throwing the ball, I could see them relying on the run, and that is where McKinnon is going to shine.
Yeah, I do think McKinnon's going to take over that number 2 role, too, even when Raheem Mostert and Tevin Coleman are back in the offense. But Melvin Gordon was on the list, and I definitely like Melvin Gordon this week. You know, it's not even so much that the Buccaneers' run defense is bad. They're actually a pretty good unit, but part of it is that, you know, with so many injuries in this offense, when you've got a quarterback like Jeff Driscoll there starting, I don't think they want to keep as much pressure on him, which means they've got to get the ball in Melvin Gordon's hands. Also, the Bucs have had problems against pass-catching running backs, and I think that's what you're going to see a lot of from Gordon. A lot of those dump-offs, try to get him out in space, try to take some pressure off the quarterback a little bit. So I do think this is a good spot for Gordon this week.
Let's take a look at the wide receivers, if we could fly that in. Thank you so much. We have Mike Evans, Julian Edelman, who obviously was making a huge connection with Cam Newton up there in Seattle. CeeDee Lamb. The Seahawks give up so much production to the slot position. CeeDee Lamb has run the 2nd most slot routes in the NFL. And then, of course, we've got Corey Davis, who Marcus talked about earlier, and DK Metcalf. But, Marcus, I will go to you. Do you have a wide receiver? You know what? Go off list, please. I've already covered these guys.
Sure, I will. I'm going to go with Allen Robinson, and this sort of ties back in to my hot take at the beginning of the show about Mitchell Trubisky having a big day. I mean, if he's going to do that, then he's going to get the ball probably in the hands of his best playmaker at the pass-catching position, and that's Allen Robinson. I mean, look, he had a good week 1. Not so great in week 2, but I wouldn't really worry about it. His target share is going to be the same. He generally has a pretty safe floor, and he's playing a Falcons defense that has had its issues so far this season. So I feel really great about A-Rob having a good bounce-back week.
I love that. A-Rob, go have a day and then go get yourself paid. Now, a wide receiver that I'm really excited to start this week, it's a little bit deeper of a name. It is Deontay Johnson. Not a lot of hype going into the preseason, but then he's kind of flexed his muscles and showed up. He's had 10-plus targets in both games on the season. He is only one of 2 players in the NFL. Calvin Ridley also shares that target share. He's leading the Steelers in targets, receptions, receiving yards this season. So this is a really good pickup. They have a favorable matchup against the Texans, who are allowing 33.5 fantasy points against receivers this season. So go have a day, Deontay Johnson.
Yeah, I'm just sitting there watching Ben Roethlisberger throw the football. Glad that, there's been no problem with him coming back from his injury. It's good to see, and it's good for our fantasy lineups. And that was 15 for 15 presented by Geico. Coming up, it's superhero time. And as Michael Keaton, the best Batman, once said, you want to get nuts? Come on, let's get nuts. You're watching NFL Fantasy Game Day presented by Geico. Oh, hey, look, it's Deshaun Watson. We'll be back in a sec. There he is, Odell Beckham Jr. getting ready for a big Week 3 game. Still waiting. Had a touchdown last week. There we go. Welcome back to NFL Fantasy Game Day presented by Geico. Want to let you know that you can hit us up with any questions at NFL Fantasy on Twitter, or if you're watching the show via YouTube and want to use the chat function there, our Michael F. Florio is currently answering questions. He'll join the show a little later on. But you know what? You know what? Michael F. doesn't get all the fun. Why don't we answer some of these questions? Marcus, let's ask you. 1 point PPR league, T.Y. Hilton or David Johnson?
I'm leaning toward DJ in this one, and I know the matchup isn't particularly great for him this week against the Steelers, but I do think he's sort of game script independent. We know Duke Johnson is not going to play, so he's going to get opportunities as a runner and as a pass catcher. With T.Y. Hilton and Phillip Rivers, that connection has not worked so far, and I'm really worried about him this year.
Levy wants to know who to start, Antonio Gibson or the Bengals RB1. Kimmy, who do you got?
I'm going to go with Joe Mixon. Now, I know he had a disappointing week 1 and a tough matchup, and then the Bengals were chasing the Browns from behind in week 2, so they really didn't justify handing him off the ball. But they're up against the Eagles. I think this is a favorable matchup, and the week where Joe Mixon finally comes out as an RB1.
And let's try one more if we can. Jenny wants to know Boyd, the Lazard King, or Robbie Anderson. Ooh, Boyd is kind of interesting this week. John Ross is not active. Healthy scratch, I believe. But, man, Robbie Anderson has been playing so well since he's joined the Carolina Panthers, it's kind of hard to leave him on the bench, even though it's a tougher matchup against those LA Chargers. I do believe that it's going to be a game where they're going to have to throw the ball an awful lot. So I'm kind of leaning towards Robbie Anderson. So, Jenny, I hope that works out for you. Time now for Fantasy Heroes presented by nobody. But Geico's presenting the show, so let's say they're the default sponsor there. But let's look at 3 flex starts who can help you win your week. You know what, Kimmy, let's start with you.
All right, I'm going to the Washington football team to talk about scary Terry McLaurin. Favorable matchup against the Cleveland Browns, who are allowing almost 44 fantasy points per game to wide receivers this season. That's the 5th most in the NFL. I think all of us were excited about Terry McLaurin. We wanted them in the Washington football team to have a moment, and that's what he's doing. He had 10 targets, 7 receptions, 125 yards, and a touchdown in week 2 against the Cardinals. I think he can duplicate those numbers, maybe even double them. Hey, I'm going crazy this Sunday. So if you have a flex spot that's open, consider putting scary Terry McLaurin in there.
I'm looking at Joshua Kelly, because if there's one thing we have learned through the first couple weeks of the season, it is to start your running backs against the Carolina Panthers, and throw in the fact that, look, I think we started the season thinking that, okay, Austin Eckler was the guy and that Josh Kelly was going to come in and sort of play the Austin Eckler role. That's not right. Austin Eckler is still Austin Eckler. Josh Kelly is taking over for Melvin Gordon. He is that guy that's getting the ball in those spots to run between the tackles, getting down near the end zone there. He's getting about 18.5 touches per game compared to 20 for Eckler. So both these guys are being used very heavily. And I do see a situation where Josh Kelly goes out and smashes against a pretty bad Carolina run defense.
I believe that Joshua Kelly's success is a reward for me watching all those UCLA football games over the last couple of years. It has been a treat to watch Oklahoma football for the past couple of seasons, and CeeDee Lamb has really taken off with the Dallas Cowboys. Really is the player that we thought he was going to be coming into the NFL. And I mentioned this earlier in the show. We love him this week, especially because only one receiver has run more routes out of the slot than CeeDee Lamb. The Seahawks are getting abused by the slot position. We saw that last week with Julian Edelman. So I don't know if you're on Twitter at all, but CeeDee Lamb, along with The Rock, they were trending this morning, and it's all for positive reasons. So we love to get him into the lineup. There's another flex spot, though, because I got this question a lot. I'm sure you guys saw this as well. Mike Davis this week or Devonta Freeman. Marcus, if you had to pick between those two players, which one are you going with?
You know, it sounds kind of weird, but I think I might lean toward Devonta Freeman. And I know he hasn't been there very long in New York. He just got there a few days ago to sign with the team. But I think the Giants have sort of signaled the fact that the Wayne Gallman experiment is sort of over there. Dion Lewis, we know, is sort of that third down pass catching back. Freeman, even on a short week, I guess a short ramp-up week, can still run the football effectively. And as much as we sort of fear this Niners defense, they've had so many injuries up front, especially, that this is not the same front four that we're used to seeing. And I could see a situation where Devonta Freeman has a pretty decent game in what I think is going to be a closer contest than people are giving it credit for.
Right, Marcus, I 100% agree, and I think Devonta Freeman is also the guy that I would take as opposed to Mike Davis. Now, I do think that Dion Lewis is expected to be the main guy today because, as you mentioned, Devonta Freeman, he's really only had a week to get familiar with that offense. But the fact that he is coming in, he's a veteran guy, he understands how to play and run the football. I think they're going to want to rely and lean on him because they also have a really tough schedule the next few weeks. They have one of the hardest strength of schedules amongst all of the teams in the NFL. So I think he needs to get into that system. He needs to get familiar with Daniel Jones passing off the ball to him. So I kind of do feel a lot more comfortable getting up in a lineup if you absolutely have to.
Wait a minute. Hold on. Devonta Freeman last week was at like a Whole Foods watching the games while he was searching for, organic milk, or I guess all milk's organic, but whatever. The point is, Mike Davis played last week. He was targeted 8 times, had 8 receptions, and I think we can all agree that, Christian McCaffrey's a system. I'm joking. He's not a system running back. But I think that we saw enough out of Mike Davis, and I know the matchup against the Buccaneers was kind of favorable for him. But here's somebody who's been in this offense, been working, and has actually been a pretty nice piece anytime he's been given an opportunity. I think back to that unfortunate injury he had at South Carolina and what that really has done to his career and how he's battled back. I think this is an opportunity for him to go out and shine. So if I pick them up off the waiver wire this week, I feel pretty comfortable getting him into my lineup. So that is that. And that is the final word. No, I'm just kidding. All right, we're going to move on here. And by the way, you might not know this. Dalton Schultz. That sounds like the name of a love interest for Veronica Lodge on Riverdale. And coming up, he's actually somebody who can help you win this week. So we got him along with some other sleepers that you can trust, plus some tight end plays and things like that. All that next on NFL Fantasy Game Day, presented by Geico. And here are my stardom tight ends for week 3. Tyler Higbee, Jonnu Smith, Noah Fant, Logan Thomas. We will give you one more chance. And, of course, Jared Cook. I know that you don't see Travis Kelce on this board. Trust me, you are going to be starting Travis Kelce. Please don't hit me up with, so do I start Logan Thomas over Kelce? No, but welcome back to NFL Fantasy Game Day presented by Geico. And let's talk about those tight ends. Let's just jump right into it. Jonnu Smith, Darren the Baller Waller. Who scores more points this week, Marcus?
Jonnu. I don't know. He needs like some sort of call or something to like, to signal that we're on the Jonnu train. I've been on the Jonnu train pretty much all off season. Last week he had a big game with 2 touchdowns, and part of it is they're not just using him as a traditional tight end. They're sort of using him almost as a big slot receiver, which is causing some matchup problems there. So I like what he's doing. I like the fact that the Titans passing game is pretty concentrated. Right now, it's Corey Davis, it's Jonnu Smith, and I think certainly until A.J. Brown gets back in, it's going to continue to be that way.
I love that, and I don't want this to be an anti-Jonnu Smith thing, but I'm going with Darren Waller. that was my tribal call, trying to mimic you. But guys, we always talk about George Kittle and Travis Kelce being top tight ends. But what about Darren Waller, right? He's ranking second amongst all tight ends in fantasy points per game, also having the most targets this game with 12, and the most receptions with 9 amongst all tight ends, right? I understand he's going up against Bill Belichick and the New England Patriots. They still have that scary defense, but he's really good. So why is there even a question about who's going to have more points or getting them in your lineup? You want to start Darren Waller, and he's going to ball out. Just mark my words.
Well, we got to make the tough choices there, Kimmy. I don't think that there's any wrong answers except for yours. Now we're moving on to the. I'm kidding. I'm joking. Please. What about Hayden Hurst going up against the Bears? Dalton Schultz. Who do we like here, Kimmy? Why don't we start with you?
You know what? I like Dalton Schultz, right? There was a ton of hype around Blake Jarwin. You were one of those people. Adam Rank, Marcus, you as well. And then he got injured, right? But Dalton Schultz, he's really stepped up. He had 10 targets, 9 receptions, 88 yards, and a touchdown against the Falcons in week 2. Now they're going up against the Seahawks, which some may say, hey, no, that's a really tough defense. But the Seattle Seahawks are allowing the most reception yards per game this season with 415. With Dak being able to stretch the field and really get the ball out to multiple receivers, I do think Dalton Schultz is going to be one of those guys. So I like him. Plus, Hayden Hurst has kind of faded away from me. So I'm all in on the Schultz train.
Look, I'm still pounding the table for Hayden Hurst. He had a nice bounce back in week 2, and I think he's going to be helped by the fact that, as we mentioned, Julio Jones not available this week. I think that means Russell Gage is going to have to do some different things, and I don't know if that's necessarily going to be his strength. Can he be a guy who stretches the field, who plays well on the outside? I mean, we'll see, but I think it does open up some stuff underneath for Hayden Hurst this week. The other part of it is, as much as I like Dalton Schultz, I think some of his production we saw last week came from the fact that the Cowboys were in catch-up mode. And while the Falcons were so worried about Amari Cooper, CeeDee Lamb, Michael Gallup, that allowed Schultz to get open. I don't know if that's going to be the case necessarily this week.
You know what? Yeah, when we were filling this homework out earlier in the week, I really liked Dalton Schultz, but I think with Julio out, that kind of swings it to me for Hayden Hurst. But guess what? Time now for Fantasy Insurance presented by Geico. These are going to be our favorite sleepers heading into week 3. And Kimmy, why don't you lead us off?
All right, let's talk about Darrell Henderson for the Los Angeles Rams. Malcolm Brown, he was dealing with a finger injury last week. Cam Akers, he's not playing on Sunday because he's still dealing with that rib injury from last week. So who steps up? It's Darrell Henderson. This was a guy who, again, was a huge name on the waiver wires this week. 20 fantasy points against the Eagles in week 2, tied for 10th amongst running back. 12 rushes, 81 yards, a touchdown, while also having 2 receptions for 40 yards against the Eagles. Again, Eagles secondary, not so great. But again, he is going to be one of the only healthy running backs on that team. I see huge opportunity, huge upside. Get him in your lineup if you have a flex spot that's open.
Well, if you are having tight end issues, if you've lost George Kittle, if you're just trying to figure out what to do, Logan Thomas is a really nice option. Concentrate. Works great for passing games, not so much for fruit juice. With Washington, pretty much they're throwing the ball to Terry McLaurin and to Logan Thomas. Those are the 2 guys that are seeing most of the targets there. Target share just about equal, and they're facing a Cleveland defense that, as you see on screen there, they've given up the most fantasy points per game to tight ends. They are struggling to cover the position. So Logan Thomas, I think, has a real potential to go out and make some plays today.
So Marcus is saying Logan Thomas over Travis Kelce. Got it. No, I'm kidding. I like N'Keal Harry for the New England Patriots. I really do believe that he's starting to gain some of the trust with Cam Newton. Now, obviously, we saw the rapport that he had with Julian Edelman on Sunday night, but now they're really starting to get the ball into N'Keal Harry's hands, trying to let him go out and do his thing. He seems like one of those prototypical wide receivers who could really step up and make an impact here. We're seeing a lot of trust here. Just watching these highlights right here, some of the throws that Cam is making to him, those are not easy throws. He's going up, he's battling for the football, and he's making the catch. And you know what? I'm still a little sore from him, from week 1 when he fumbled through the end zone and cost me a couple of points, but that's okay. I think we can trust him this week against the Las Vegas Raiders. And that was Fantasy Insurance presented by Geico. Now, who doesn't love a good redemption story? And if you're like me, you've been streaming Cobra Kai on Netflix and watching the redemption of Johnny Lawrence. Coming up, the players who will strike first, strike hard, and show no mercy this week. You're watching NFL Fantasy Game Day presented by Juju Smith-Schuster, there he is, getting ready, feeling it, feeling the flow, getting ready. Steelers, Texans today. I know everybody's talking about the Watt brothers, but that Steelers offense starting to look pretty good. Kind of like how we remembered it back in 2018. And welcome back to NFL Fantasy Game Day presented by Geico. There are a ton of star players who need to have that bounce back game. Let's go through some of the scenarios here, a little redemption face off. We will start with Clyde Edwards-Helaire or Kenyan Drake. Marcus, which way are you going?
I'm going Kenyan Drake here just because the matchup, I think, is better for him against the Detroit Lions. I like CEH. I think he's got great opportunity, but I do think he's got a much tougher hurdle to climb, or to go over, I should say, against that Baltimore Ravens defense. The Lions have been struggling defensively. I talked about how much I like Kyler. I just think this is a smash spot for the entire Cardinals offense and a get-right game for Kenyan Drake.
Come on, Marcus. Let's not even talk about tough matchups. It's Clyde Edwards-Helaire. And yes, I'm taking a homer pick, but I don't care because it's Clyde. Okay, anyway, you guys get the point. Guys, he's outscored Kenyan Drake in both weeks this season, also getting way more targets and yards per game. Clyde Edwards-Helaire, 5 targets a game, 16 receptions this season, higher than Drake, who's had 2 targets and 7 receptions and yards per game. Come on, I understand that the Baltimore Ravens are allowing the fewest fantasy points per game to running backs this season, but I don't care. It's Clyde Edwards-Helaire. The Chiefs are going to want to make a mark on this game. It's a huge game. It's Lamar Jackson, Patrick Mahomes. It's really flexing who is the best team in the NFL, right? Clyde Edwards-Helaire, he's going to go out. He's going to ball. So, yeah, it's him.
All right.
I understand. It's a homer, whatever.
Listen, I appreciate your enthusiasm. Let's go to a couple other running backs. We have the Bengals RB1, and we have Devin Singletary for the Buffalo Bills. Kimmy, why don't you take this one?
All right, I am going to go with Joe Mixon. He's going up against the Eagles. Earlier, we had a fan question who they asked, do I play Joe Mixon? Do I not? I think this is finally going to be that breakout game. Again, he had a disappointing week 1, and then in week 2, the Bengals were playing catch up. Joe Burrow really had to throw the ball so they could get within, red zone opportunities and get in field goal range. This is finally the game and the matchup against the Eagles where he can do that. The Eagles have allowed a top 15 running back in both games this season. Their secondary is incredibly weak, and Joe Mixon finally can go out and perform.
Well, I'm going to go on the other side with Devin Singletary in this one, and a lot of it has to do with Zach Moss not being available this week. It seems like this is going to open the door for Singletary to get more of that workhorse load. Now, the question becomes, who gets those touches down near the goal line? Because it generally has not been Singletary. So if they get near the end zone, does he get the opportunity to score, or will it be Josh Allen? But I just think in terms of total touches, total snaps played, no Zach Moss means a whole lot more work for Devin Singletary this week.
It's going to be Josh Allen near the goal line. He's going to get he's going to rush for 2 touchdowns this week. You just know it. You just feel every time you feel like, Devin Singletary's got an opportunity. Here comes Josh Allen to take it away. What about the wide receiver position? Let's go with Juju Smith-Schuster, who we just saw a moment ago, or Adam Thielen. Kimmy, which way are you leaning?
I'm going to lean with Thielen. He had a huge performance earlier this season in fantasy football in week 1. Then in week 2, after he got all that hype, he kind of faded back a little bit, right? But he's had 8 targets in both games this season. He had 31 fantasy points against Green Bay Packers in that monster performance in week 1, but then he fell to 6 points last week in week 2. Now, the Tennessee Titans, I know that they have not allowed a top 15 wide receiver this season. However, this is going to be a deep ball passing game, and I think that Adam Thielen is going to shine. No hate against Juju. I just really think that Thielen is going to have the moment.
Yeah, I'm going to agree on that one, too. I think this is a Thielen bounce-back game. Kirk Cousins was awful last week, and it's hard to imagine he can get any worse than he was. Plus, just the target share for Thielen more than anything else, I think sort of dictates this. The Vikings have not shown any real faith in either B.C. Johnson or Justin Jefferson to go out and make plays. So just the fact that Adam Thielen might see 50-11 targets this week has a lot to do with him possibly bouncing back.
Yeah, that one seems like a pretty easy one with Adam Thielen. Our producer gave us one with Allen Robinson or Hollywood Brown. That's too easy. That's Allen Robinson. We're not even going to talk about that. We're going to go to the tight end position. What about Jared Cook or Zach Ertz? Markets, which way are you leaning there?
I'm going toward Jared Cook this week, and I think we all expected big things from him last week against the Raiders, and it obviously didn't happen. But look, I don't expect to see Michael Thomas again this week for the New Orleans Saints. They've got to do some things to kind of spread the ball around. I do like Traquan Smith for New Orleans in this passing game, but they've got to get Jared Cook going. So I think, plus throw in the fact that I just have not sort of been all that comfortable with Zach Ertz this year. I think it's Cook for me.
100% agree, Marcus. It's Jared Cook. If we look at the Philadelphia Eagles, Carson Wentz and Zach Ertz, they've kind of lost themselves this season. There's a lot of hype going into a season, and I know that a lot of fantasy managers had both of them in their starting lineups, and it's been nothing but disappointment. I think New Orleans Saints are a little bit embarrassed about that loss that they had on Monday to the Las Vegas Raiders, and Sean Payton's going to want to go back out there and prove that they are going to be great. I understand they're going up against the Packers, but I do think that Jared Cook is going to be able to go out and perform. So if you have some question on the tight end position, Cook is your guy.
Let's sneak in some fan questions right now if we can fly those in. Eduardo wants to know Josh Allen or Lamar Jackson. Marcus, who you picking?
I think Josh Allen has a good game this week, but I can't go away from Lamar. I just think his rushing floor, first of all, is a lot more solid, and I think that might end up being the difference between the two of them. It's a tough call for me, but I think I'm going to lean toward L. Jags.
Why do you have both those quarterbacks? All right, next, Scott wants to know Hunter Henry, Noah Fant, Kimmy. What do you got?
All right, well, both of these guys are going to be playing with new quarterbacks this week, so there's some skepticism there. But I'm going to go with my homie Noah Fant on this one, only because Jerry Jeudy and Courtland Sutton are both dealing with injuries. I could see him being kind of used as a slot receiver as well. So Noah Fant, that's my pick.
And we have one last more? One last more. What does that even mean? Flex Marvin Jones Jr. or Michael Gallup. B-Train. Let me tell you something. Michael Gallup has been a huge disappointment so far this season, but going up against that Seattle Seahawks team that has not been able to stop anybody, I want every part of this Dallas Cowboys offense. I'm going to go with Michael Gallup. And please continue to send in your questions at NFL Fantasy. And, of course, Michael F. Florio, who's been answering a lot of these, is going to be joining us. And that means it's 15 minutes to kickoff. We're answering your questions. We're talking our top starts. It's Sunday Fun Day. You know what? Time now for 15 minutes to kickoff, presented by Geico. Here are the Week 3 notable actives and inactives. This is the same board we used in the A block. That means nothing to you, but apparently to our producers. It means the word, whatever. Listen, I'm reading the screen. Josh Jacobs, Darren Waller, both active. Kenny Golladay making his first appearance of the season, but some big names are out this week. Raheem Mostert, A.J. Brown, George Kittle, and Julio Jones. All of those players will not be suiting up this week, so plan your lineups accordingly. And welcome back to NFL Fantasy Game Day presented by Geico. Oh, I'm sorry. That was 15 minutes to kickoff presented by Geico. And welcome back to the show. As you see, Kimmy, Marcus, and we are joined by Michael F. Florio, who was out there answering questions. He was rocking a cool Hawaiian shirt. Michael, the shirt's awesome, but who was the number one player you were being asked about this Sunday morning?
It was Falcons wide receiver Russell Gage. A lot of people are wondering what they should do with him with Julio Jones now out. Some names I said I would use over Gage were Josh Kelly. I said I would use Cooper Kupp or John Brown over him. But then a lot of questions were like AJ Green or Russell Gage, Kenny Golladay, T.Y. Hilton, Corey Davis. And I said I would use Russell Gage over all of those players.
All right. Well, you know what? You were so busy answering fan questions. We should do that right now. So if we could pull up some of those fan questions, and Will wants to know, Standard League, would you start McLaurin, Montgomery, or Kelly in the flex? Florio, since you just joined the show, why don't you lead us off?
I would, as much as I like Josh Kelly's matchup this week, I would still go with Terry McLaurin there. We saw what his upside is last week, and it is another favorable matchup for him this week.
All right, next question comes from AC. Diggs or Thielen for the flex? Kimmy, how about you?
Ooh, even though I was just hyping up Adam Thielen, I want to do Stephon Diggs. We saw what him and Josh Allen could do. They were on our favorite wide receiver stacks, having almost 63 fantasy points last week. So I think they can duplicate it again this week. So Diggs for me.
All right, Quinn needs a flex. Henderson, Wilson Jr., or John Brown. Standard League, Marcus, which way are you going?
You know what? I think this week I might go with John Brown. I mean, I know I said I was sort of back and forth between Josh Allen and Lamar Jackson, but I do think that John Brown's going to get a lot of targets. I will say, by the way, Jeff Wilson, kind of a sneaky play, I think, in deeper leagues, because I do think he's going to get a good number of touches behind Jerick McKinnon.
All right, let's get one more in here. Tyler needs to know Big Ben against the Texans or Rivers against the Jets. I would say Big Ben, but Florio, do you agree with that?
I would go with Big Ben there of the two.
I'm sorry, I didn't mean to force you into that. Hey, I'm saying Big Ben. You better agree, Florio. No, but I do believe that Big Ben is a great start this week against the Houston Texans. And, it's time for Sunday Funday.
Sunday Funday.
All right, which players are going to pop off this week? Who is going to be the top scorer? Kimmy, why don't you start off? Oh, Marcus,
right.
Sorry. Excuse me.
Okay, well, I'm going to go Cam Newton here as a guy that you got to put in your lineup who's going to have a huge day against the Raiders. We've seen him be effective as a passer. We saw that last week in that game against the Seahawks. But also, I feel like in some ways you have to sort of evaluate Cam a little bit as a running back because of what he does with his legs. And the Raiders struggled against running backs so far this season. I think Cam's going to figure out how to do it both with his arm and with his legs this week. So he's definitely a guy you got to have in your lineup.
All right, Marcus, I'm going to hop off of you because you talked about this guy earlier, and he's going to do it again this week. Kyler Murray, I think he's going to be the top scorer at the QB position. He's averaging almost 30 fantasy points this season, rushing for 79 yards per game. That is the most amongst quarterbacks. You even said it earlier. He is going to rival Lamar Jackson for the most rushing yards from a quarterback in this 2020-2021 season. I think there's a favorable matchup against the Lions, who are allowing the 7th most fantasy points to quarterbacks. So Kyler Murray, I love you. Go ball out.
I really like the Kyler Murray pick, Kimmy, but if it is not him, I think it'll be Cowboys quarterback Dak Prescott. There's so much fantasy goodness in this game. The Seattle Seahawks are allowing over 450 passing yards per game right now, and we saw last week that when they get near the goal line, Dak is not afraid to potentially run one in himself or three. So I think his upside is really, really high in week 3.
Yeah, I know we're hyping this game up a lot, and I'm going to go take the quarterback on the other side of the ball in this one, and Russell Wilson. And I got a lot of shares. What up? I got a lot of shares of Russell Wilson this year, and I'm extremely excited about it because as everybody talked about letting Russ cook this year, turns out the secret ingredient was just having a terrible defense, which forces him into a position to continually throw the football. All right, let's move on to our must-start quarterbacks for week 3. I know we had we all listed quarterbacks, but let's go back. Let's go get another round of quarterbacks. Florio, why don't you lead us off?
Yeah, this guy, a couple weeks ago, he was not even close to a must-start option, but it is Cincinnati Bengals quarterback Joe Burrow. And I think it's really surprising, but through 2 weeks, Joe Burrow leads the NFL in pass attempts. They're letting him just throw the ball immediately, not really trying to ease him in at all. And I think this is a week where we could see a lot of pass attempts from Burrow once again, as the Eagles strengthen their defenses up front against the run, but their secondary can be picked on.
I love that, Florio. Earlier in the show, my hot take was that Joe Burrow was going to double the points of Carson Wentz, and the Bengals were going to get their first win. But another guy who's going to have tons of fantasy points on the board is Ryan Tannehill. He's had 2+ passing touchdowns in 9 straight games. No other quarterback has had more than 3 straight games where they've had 2+ passing touchdowns. He's had 22.75 fantasy points, 6 week 9 in the 2019 season. That's 3rd amongst quarterbacks. I know he's kind of a deeper name at the QB position, but he's really kind of showed these last 2 weeks that he is a contender for fantasy gold. So Ryan Tannehill, get him into your lineups, and thank me later.
Marcus. I'm not sure if Marcus has dropped off or not. I can talk about Aaron Rodgers because I know he was going to talk about him here if you want to roll that tape.
Well, I'm going to go with Aaron Rodgers here. And look, at some point we got to put some respect on Ryan Tannehill's name. So maybe we should, speaking of disrespect, Aaron Rodgers having his petty party so far this season. Look, I think he's going to go out against the Saints in what could be a very high-scoring game, continue to throw the football well. We'll see whether or not he has Devontae Adams, but either way, he's still going to find ways to get the football out to his other receivers, to his running backs, and I think Aaron Rodgers continues to play hot the way he has at the start of the year.
I'm going to go with Patrick Mahomes, and this is something that Timmy talked about earlier in the show, and I just feel like it needs to be reiterated because I got a number of questions about it. Like, should you feel comfortable starting him against the Baltimore Ravens? And you have to remember, in the 2 games he has played against the Ravens, he has a passer rating of 108.8, 5 touchdowns, 1 interception. He's averaged over 375 yards in those 2 games against them. So Patrick Mahomes, don't even worry about it. Make sure you're starting him on Monday night. Let's move on to the running back position. And Kimmy, let's start with you. Who's the running back that you feel is a must start in week 3?
A must-start running back for me is James Conner. I say this because he's a good player, but I also say this because I had him on my bench last week, and then he went out and had a monster game, and then I lost that matchup. So I'm kind of just still dealing with that. But he had 20 fantasy points versus the Denver Broncos in week 2, which tied for 10th amongst running back, 16 rushes, 106 yards, and a touchdown, as well as having 2 targets for 15 yards. Versus the Bronco. He played 77% of the snaps. Now, I know that there was a conversation. Is it Benny Snell or is it James Conner? That's why I sat him. Obviously, he has gone to show that it is James Conner. Now, they're going up against the Texans, who have allowed a top 20 fantasy running back in both games. So, James Conner, I learned my lesson last week. I'm getting you into my starting lineup this week. So, please, please, please do not disappoint me.
I am going to go with Kenyan Drake here this week. I know he hasn't really given you what you expected out of him the first 2 weeks, but I think this is a week where he reminds you why you took him in the first round.
Well, I'm going to go with Miles
tough
Sanders
matchups
here
to open
in
the
this
year,
situation.
but
I mean, look,
this week
Sanders
against
is
the
a guy
Lions,
that's
who've
going to get a
allowed
lot
the
of
4th most
opportunity
fantasy points to running backs. They've also allowed nearly 180 rushing yards per game to the position, so I think this is a week where Kyler Murray won't be hogging all the rushing yards. Instead, Kenyan Drake will be able to get some, especially if they're playing with the lead in the second half.
All right, I'm going to talk about Miles Sanders now. Look, I think Sanders is going to get a lot of opportunity this week for the Eagles. They've got to figure out a way to sort of
and we're seeing some
Miles
Sanders
is going to be by throwing the football to Miles Sanders, kind of giving him some easy throws to try and take some of the pressure off of him. They're going to give him a ton of touches. He had 27 opportunities, 20 carries, ended up with 3 catches out of 7 targets last week. I think they're going to continue to lean on him and try to do some things to sort of help out Carson Wentz and get this offense kickstarted.
And I do believe that this is an opportunity for Derrick Henry to get well. I know a lot of you drafted him in the first round expecting a huge season from him, but really it's been Ryan Tannehill carrying the offense so far. That is not a formula that is going to get them through the entire season. And I think that they're smart enough to know that. But if you can sneak through a couple of weeks and not have to put a lot of mileage on Derrick Henry, I think it behooves them to do that. But I think this will be the perfect spot to get him some work here in week 3. Let's talk about the wide receivers. Marcus, let's lead off with you. Which one of the Tampa Bay Buccaneers wide receivers are you going with?
I'm going to go with Chris Godwin here. He is back after missing last week in concussion protocol. He's going to be back in that offense for Tampa Bay. And we know that Tom Brady loves his slot guys. He's got an incredibly talented one in Chris Godwin. The Broncos have some injuries in that secondary. And so I think this is a way, like I talked about with the Eagles, trying to get some easy pitches and catches for Carson Wentz. I think the Buccaneers want to do something to sort of get Tom Brady going again. And the best way to do that may be to throw the football to number 14.
Well, you don't actually ever have to get Russell Wilson going because he's been going all season. And who has he been going to? DK Metcalf. That is my wide receiver must start for week 3. 19 fantasy points on the season, 8th amongst wide receivers, a receiving touchdown in both games in week 1 and week 2. Hopefully able to do that again this week. Dallas has allowed the 7th most fantasy points per game to wide receivers. They're getting almost 43 fantasy points against a wide receiver position. Russell Wilson, he's going to continue to want to throw the ball. The Seahawks have finally let Russ cook, right? This is always what we wanted. He's cooking, and he's going to be cooking and dishing it out to DK Metcalf.
I think CeeDee Lamb is going to have a welcome to the NFL type performance. I think he's going to break out. Rank was talking about it earlier. He's second in the league in routes ran out of the slot, and that is the weakness right now for the Seattle Seahawks defense. They're allowing the most fantasy points to slot receivers. They're allowing over 200 receiving yards to receivers lined up in the slot so far this year. Only one other team is even allowing over 100. And CeeDee Lamb has looked like he has surpassed Michael Gallup in the first 2 weeks, at least in the pecking order for targets. I think he has a really, really big week 3.
We're so invested in this matchup. I hope this turns out to be the game that we're all expecting it to be. I'm going to go, though, with Calvin Ridley, though, for my pick. Now, I made this pick thinking that Julio was at least going to dress and try to give it a go, but I still feel confident enough in Calvin Ridley. The one thing about the Bears defense, they've allowed only 1 touchdown pass to a receiver this season. They have been playing pretty well, but I do believe that this is a game for the Falcons to have to get right. You're 0-2, you're at home, you have to come out and you have to play well. I know the Bears are 2-0, and I think if you're a Bears fan, you're not feeling great about, even though you're 2-0, you're still feeling like, oh, this could be a game that cannot go our way. We saw this what happened last year when Drew Brees wasn't playing for the Saints. But anyways, let's do some fan questions and try to get as many of these in as possible. Dylan wants to know, Leonard Fournette or Traquan Smith? It's a standard league, Florio, so which way are you going?
I'm going to go with Fournette there. In standard, I always lean towards the running backs because I think they have the better chance of scoring, and I really liked what I saw to Fournette in week 2.
All right, we got another question. Let's fly it in here. Moore, I'm imagining it's DJ Moore or Bobby Woods. Half PPR. Kimmy, which way are you going?
I'm going to go with your guy, Bobby Trees, on this one. I think there's a favorable matchup, and thank me later once he balls out, and don't tweet at me if he doesn't.
No, everybody tweeted Kimmy if that does not come through. Dylan, is this the same Dylan? AJ Green or Mike Williams? This is a difficult one. I'm going to go with AJ Green here. I think that this is an opportunity for the Bengals offense to really step forward. All right, next question. All right, Keenan Allen or Corey Davis, half PPR Florio. Which way are you going?
I would go with Keenan Allen. He looked like a big winner with Justin Herbert, throwing him the ball a lot more than Tyrod did.
All right, there you go. Well, thank you so much for joining us here. We appreciate it. Good luck to you in week 3. A lot of good matchups. Hopefully that Cowboys-Seahawks game works out for you. Thank you so much for watching NFL Fantasy Game Day presented by Geico. We'll see you Monday.